Okay, I hope everyone enjoyed that video. We have some time for Q&A, so I'm hoping people will participate in that.
Anybody else getting weird feedback?
Yes. I hope is that better?
Went away for some reason.
Okay. Hopefully that's, we've gotten rid of all the weird noises. Gordon, thank you. And thanks to Team Ag for that video. And thanks obviously to the farm family who is not only doing what they can to improve the environment and the operation on their farm, but also allowed us to feature them in this webinar. And a welcome to everybody who is joining us today. I thought I would just kick it off. I think we can if we could just start by Gordon. I thought maybe talk a little bit about whether the farmers are required to do this by law, what the advantage is to the farmer, not only in terms of the regulatory requirements, but how it helps their operation, and what we're doing really to improve the operation of the farms in addition to helping them meet their requirements.
Sure. A lot of the conservation work done over the years has really been focused on outreach and education, teaching farmers and landowners better ways to be managers of their farmland and their cattle, to conserve the soil on the farm, the nutrients in animal waste, etc. And with a lot of focus on water quality, especially through social media and other interests, that whole process has really changed to try and getting shovels in the ground faster, getting things implemented. So conservation requirements for landowners have been around for good part of 40, almost 50 years. And a lot of the larger farms that sometimes have some better cash flow, farmers that really have an interest in stewardship, a lot of those folks have implemented a lot of good conservation best management practices over the years. And today we have quite a few small farms that, for whatever reason, never got conservation plans on their farms, just maybe didn't have that stewardship conservation knowledge and didn't implement some of the practices. And so part of our goal is this outreach to help them know more, understand more about conservation stewardship, these practices, but not only the right practices, but also the organizations, the infrastructure in the community to help them accomplish these goals and improve their farms. You asked a good question. Some of these practices don't cost hardly any money. They're just commonsensical things. Use a little skid loader or something and just manage stormwater off your farm so it doesn't run through your barnyard. Some of them can get very expensive. And so that's where in agriculture, small farms especially have some cash flow challenges. And so this is really, the way I explain it to some farmers, is really a community approach. The society, the community wants to help farmers because not only does it benefit the farmer, obviously, but it also benefits the community in better water quality, whether it's in your local community or the whole way down the river to the Chesapeake Bay. But not only does it bring a value to the farmer, say we put a manure storage in or help improve water quality, but it also helps enhance that profitability of the farm. Where in the past, when he lost sediment or soil out of his field to erosion, or he lost nutrients that he applied to the field through a rainstorm, now he can contain those, and those add value to the crop, becomes more efficient in managing his on-farm resources. So there's a lot of value here, and a lot of farmers, the majority of the farmers really do understand these benefits. They've just been challenged for several different reasons, whether it's knowledge, knowing who to help get the work, or just the cash flow to do the work. So we're kind of bringing this all together. And the project we have, especially in Salisbury Township and a couple of the streams we're working on, really kind of highlight how this is really a holistic approach, and that's the best way to manage it.
And Gordon, I would add to that, because I'm just struck by how that connects to the mission of Lancaster Farmland Trust. We're here to preserve farmland. Obviously the most effective way to preserve farmland is to keep the farmer on the farm and make them as efficient and effective as possible. And so when you're talking about projects that can cost upwards of $400,000, this kind of community outreach that we're doing is so critically important to keeping the farmer on the farm. We have a great question. I know you mentioned we've been talking about Salisbury Township. We have a question from Melissa. What is it about Salisbury Township that made it so interested in applying these principles? Are there other townships doing the same thing?
What's unique about Salisbury Township is Salisbury Township is predominantly about 2/3 of the population. The population of Salisbury Township is about 12,000. 2/3 of the population are Amish, Old Order Mennonite, and 95+% of the township is rural farmland. We have very little development. So as the township leaders, township supervisors were wrestling with how do we deal with the state MS4 program. So that's a program where the state requires townships to implement stormwater management practices to improve water quality in the local municipality. As the supervisors in Salisbury Township were wrestling with this, and the fact that we're rural, where most of the MS4, municipal stormwater management requirements, are supposed to occur in urban areas, we have very little urban area. So our thought was, why don't we start to do more work in these rural areas on our farms, and hopefully over the long term, that'll help us in our MS4 requirement journey. So that's what's got us into this project. And from the very beginning, we had this idea concept of working at it holistically, not just picking a farm here, one over there, work on this part of this stream, that part of that stream. Let's do the whole township simultaneously. So we created a program actually with Lancaster Farmland Trust, the Conservation District here in Lancaster, and some other folks, that we surveyed all the farms in the township to determine the total need. What farms need help, what farms are interested in help. And that process was kind of it wasn't a new prototype or a new concept, but the fact we did it holistically in the whole township was kind of a new concept. And frankly, it caught the eye of the State Department of Agriculture, State Department of DEP, and now we're kind of reaping some of the benefits of being the first one to do it holistically as a township. And we've actually been awarded quite a few dollars from the state level to help farmers here in the township. And so through that process, I think we're raising, no pun intended, the whole water quality level in the township, working on every farm rather than just piecemealing here and there.
Either Gordon or John, recognizing that watersheds spread or go beyond an individual township, how do we make sure that we're including a whole watershed? Gordon, you talked about not picking and choosing farms in different areas of a stream, but obviously a watershed spreads out beyond a township's boundaries. So what does, is Salisbury, Lancaster Farmland Trust, how are we getting out to the other townships in the watershed to say this is something that all these townships need to be working on.
Well, Gordon and I are co-leaders of the Action Team for Agriculture in the Lancaster Clean Water Partners. And the Clean Water Partners is a collaboration of many of municipalities, partners that are working in agriculture all over, everyone involved in trying to improve water quality in Lancaster County. And the strategy that we are using is focusing on catchment areas, which would be sub-watersheds, and the idea to try to really hit all the farms, especially within a catchment area. And we're focusing on 9 at this time. And we just the other day, it was announced that the Clean Water Partners received approval for a grant for $7 or $9 million from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service to make these improvements. So we're quite excited about that, but we realize it's a lot of work. But the whole strategy is focusing on catchment areas within a watershed, and they don't follow boundaries of municipalities.
And I don't think I should have introduced John more formally before we started this, but John is TMAG's business development person and obviously involved with the Lancaster Clean Water Partners. And John, we're glad to have you. I'm sorry I missed your introduction in the beginning. One question we had come in from one of the viewers of the video is, are there other conservation practices that are needed on the farms that were featured in the video? And if so, how do we follow through and make sure that they get implemented?
Well, that's a good question. So part of the process when we are invited onto a farm to help them develop a plan and do some implementation work, the plan covers all aspects of the farm. So a typical farm, small farm in Eastern Lancaster County, the major areas are managing animal waste. That's a huge one if they have livestock. The other big area is soil health. So are they implementing good soil health practices such as no-till planting, putting cover crops in their field? So after they harvest the main crop that's either for feed for their animals or a cash crop, grain, are they putting a live crop in there for the rest of the year to hold those nutrients? So animal waste, which would be nutrient management, soil management, which is soil conservation, and then streams. Those are kind of the 3 focus areas that we work on. And so the plans we develop, every farm, every property is supposed to have a conservation and a nutrient management plan. These are plans that describe how the farmer farms his land, how he manages his animals and waste. And that plan is holistic. So it describes in there any needs that might be needed to help improve the operation. And so that's kind of the map that we use to guide us through the process. And like we said before, some of these smaller farmers just don't have the wherewithal to implement maybe everything that's being asked in their plan. And that's where the funding that either comes through the state levels or private funding through Lancaster Farmland Trust can help meet the gap, fill the gap to implement these best management practices.
When we we're talking about this in the context of Salisbury Township, but obviously this, as John, as you mentioned, with the Lancaster Clean Water Partners, but this is really part of the Chesapeake Bay WIP. And John, or maybe John and Gordon both, just talk a little bit about how we fit into the Chesapeake Bay WIP and what role we play and why it's critical that I'm just struck by the fact that you start on an individual farm, which is a small segment of a stream, which has an impact downstream and obviously into the Chesapeake. And I think that's where people who aren't living on farms are really impacted by all of this, whether it's drinking water or recreational activities or whatever it is. When we see how it impacts the Chesapeake Bay, that really impacts everybody. And just curious, just ask each of you to talk a little bit about how Lancaster County fits into the overall picture in the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
Well, Lancaster County is considered a tier one of the main counties where there's a lot of focus from Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection with the Chesapeake Bay WIP, or Watershed Implementation Plan, which means, and the reason for it is that we also have, we're producing food for many people, through our farms. So, and we have lots of animals and, to produce that food, and we do a lot of intensive farming. So there's, and then working, so every farm needs to be involved. And that's why it's important that farms have plans, that the best management practices that are identified to clean water, that we are given the opportunity to get funding to help implement those practices on the farms, like you saw on the video. And it's one step at a time. It's every farm makes a big improvement, and we want to be involved, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of partners, a lot of people being involved in that process, but one step at a time, that's how you do your journey. So it's good to be a part of that. Gordon, what do you want to add?
Well, as far as Lancaster Farmland Trust, our reputation, our past has been predominantly ag land preservation. And that's great. That's a good function. But if you don't help preserve the land within the preserved land, so to speak, the quality of the land, that's a big segment that Lancaster Farmland Trust has stepped into recently to really kind of, again, bring a holistic platform to these properties that we preserve their lands. So Lancaster Farmland Trust, as John mentioned, each county, so in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, there are 7 states. Pennsylvania is one of them. There's a watershed improvement program or plan that's developed every 5 years in each state. So as John said, Lancaster County is one of the focus counties in that Pennsylvania watershed improvement program. And so there's a leadership team that manages that WIP implementation and organization. And Lancaster Farmland Trust, through our Jeff Swinehart, and a couple of us on the team here, actually serve on that management team, kind of guiding the ag implementation. And so it covers not only agriculture, the watershed improvement program, but all kinds of conservation practices, whether it be industrial and residential development practices, whether it's urban stormwater management and agriculture. So Lancaster Farmland Trust's role in the Lancaster County Watershed Improvement Program is helping to manage the ag part of that implementation process. So like John said, it's some days you just scratch your head and think, how are we ever going to get this done? But it's kind of like the old adage, eating an elephant, just one bite at a time. But there is a lot of momentum going on right now. And, Lancaster Farmland Trust, I think, has really stepped up to the plate. We have been able to access a lot of funding to help farmers. And not only, not all the farms that we work with are preserved farms. A lot of the work we do is with non-preserved farms. So our focus is more than just preserved farms. It's all agriculture, all ag lands in Lancaster County. So Lancaster Farmland Trust is extremely busy right now in this conservation implementation process for water quality.
Gordon, you make a great point. Lancaster Farmland Trust mission is to protect Lancaster farmland. We think of it in terms of one farm at a time, but it really is about protecting the soil so they can continue to grow the food and continue to be productive and feed the world. But Gordon, one thing I want to follow up with that you said, you talked about the fact that this is not just farmland that, where these practices are improving water quality. The burden of doing this is really the responsibility of a lot of different sectors in the community. You mentioned earlier about what the municipal role is, but I think it's important to point out that this is not just about what farmers are doing on their farms. That's what we happen to be involved in. But the development community, the municipalities, the business community, everybody has a role to play. Everybody contributes to the pollutants into our streams and has a role to play in terms of the cleanup as well.
Yeah, excellent point. It's interesting as I spend a lot of time with farmers, and I'm sure John can attest to this too. The first thing they say is, well, look at all those city people, look at all the stuff that they're doing. And of course, town folk like to point the finger at agriculture. But like you said, we all contribute to the positive and negative of water quality in our daily lives. When you have municipalities and you have sewer systems, sewage disposal systems, you have municipal stormwater systems. So take the city of Lancaster, for example, and all the streets in there. Where's that water go when we have a storm? Well, it washes the streets clean and the sidewalks and runs into the river. Just like farms, our fields get a deluge, and if it's more than they can handle, the soils, if you don't have good practices, some of that will wind up in the stream. So like you said, it's a journey that includes everybody. We all have our part to play. And a lot of the funding sources that we access for agriculture are also available to non-agriculture. So like you mentioned, a lot of the developers, a lot of the municipal authorities that have to deal with their urban stormwater or urban sewage disposal and so forth. So yes, it's everybody plays a part in this game, and it's exciting to see the changes. We've come a long way, pick the number, 40, 50, 100 years ago, and the way we managed water quality back then to today, where I think for most people, whether you live on a farm or live in city, water quality, when you mention water quality, images pop into your mind, where 50 years ago, what's water quality? It just means you take the stones out of it before you drink it. I don't know. But so yes, it's become a lot more prevalent, a lot of dollars going into this. So I get a lot of farmers that I talk to that they're not sure if they want to take state funding or handouts. But when you explain this whole process, that it really is a community process. It's neighbors helping neighbors. Then they have a tendency to buy into it more and accept some of the help, just like they would help their neighbor if something happened, whether he lived on the farm next door or in the little village beside their farm. So.
Well, and I think that's a great way to put it, Gordon, because it's so easy to point the finger at somebody else. Like you said, the farmers sometimes say, what about those city guys? But this really is about neighbors helping neighbors. And that means across those sectors as well, not just your neighboring farm. But and we know, because we work with farmers, how important the ag sector is. But I wanted to make sure that everyone understands that this is a shared responsibility.
However, in the Lancaster County WIP, 85% of the sediment reductions is coming from agriculture.
That's right.
The heavy lift, the heavy burden is,
no question,
is in ag. So it's great that Lancaster Farmland Trust and others are stepping up and really getting involved in that.
Gordon, you talked a little while ago about asking the farmers what they needed, doing a survey. And at the time that Lancaster Farmland Trust started that process, that was pretty unique. We've done it now in a number of townships, but talk a little bit about how that's a great first step for us to introduce the work that we do and try and get the farmers the assistance that they need.
Yeah, farmers are entrepreneurs. They're kind of their own boss. They run their own world, so to speak. And a lot of the decisions they make, whether it's for their business, their farm, or their family, is really relationship based. And so when you go to the farm and visit with them, uh, they want information from somebody that they feel has some integrity, some knowledge of agriculture, understands what they do on the farm. So with our project, this outreach that we're doing, farmer to farmer outreach, I'm a farmer myself. I've been involved in dairy industry for a lot of years. So when I step onto the farm, I know what these guys are going through. I know the struggles they have. And so I can build a rapport with them pretty quick. And once we have that relationship started, they're more likely to accept some of the help, accept some of the suggestions, most of all, accept some of the referrals. We use technical service providers like Team Ag and some of the other consultants in the county, even the conservation district. And if the farmer gets that referral, that information from somebody they respect, they're more likely to apply it or use it, or go down the journey of getting some practices or funding, that sort of thing. So the not only that aspect of it, but also determining farmer interests. So we have a lot of small farmers that, whether they're Amish or old order Mennonite or non-Amish, like I said, they're independent, they're entrepreneurial in nature, and they don't like to take help all the time. And they want to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. So getting farmers from point A to implementation sometimes is more than just funding access. It's kind of helping them through the change cycle, I'll say, of accepting help. And so that's one of the great things about doing this survey work. We know who's interested. We know who is 100% interested. We know who's 50% interested. We know who's 0% interested. And so that gives us a target group of where we can start to work first. And but we also know who needs work done, but maybe they only have 20% interest or no interest. We can go make some other visits there and kind of help them through the journey or through the change cycle. And the best example we have is when we go into a township and start to survey farms and start to get work implemented. It's that neighbor to neighbor kind of ministry almost, or outreach. When they see a neighbor doing it and it works, they're more likely to try it themselves. And so one of the aspects that we gets used all the time, and we want to do a little more focus with it, but of course the COVID pandemic has kind of put the brakes on a lot of our social activities. As we work in a township, we identify 2 or 3 what we call demonstration farms, where these farms have implemented various practices that other neighbors could use and implement. And so we like to use those as demonstration farms. We'll have an open house there, maybe a meal, invite some other experts in the conservation industry in to talk about the practice they implemented. One of the things that a lot of farmers find really fascinating is if you can get somebody from the Chesapeake Bay to come up and talk about life on the bay, fishing, the fishermen on the bay are just as tough and independent minded and change averse as farmers are. And so when you get those 2 groups together, they really hit it off well. And when you understand where that drop of water that flows in the stream past your farm winds up, you have a little more sensitivity towards taking care of it, whether it winds up in somebody's drinking water in Baltimore or whether it winds up in the Chesapeake Bay where maybe your fish fillet came from today.
I think that's what's been missing in the past, that holistic approach. We have a few more minutes left. If anyone has questions, please put them into the chat. John, I wanted to ask you a question from Team Ag's perspective. You go out on a farm. Take us through the process. What happens? You step on the farm for the first time. What does Team Ag do and to get to a plan for for an individual farmer?
Um, well, first of all, we want to hear from the farmer what's their vision, what's their hope for the future for their farm. And at the same time, we also take a look at what's there and may make some suggestions as well. But it's really driven by what the farmer wants, as well as, yeah, again, if there are regulatory issues, things that we see that need to be corrected, we'll want to point that out. But the first step would be to check to see if the farm already has the plans. These would be, required by government, the conservation plan or an ag E&S plan, or then if they have animals, a manure management plan or nutrient management plan. And looking at those plans and see if they have to be updated to be able to identify some of the practices that may be needed to make those conservation improvements. So we may talk about how to go about updating the plan, or if they don't have a plan, then we'd want to talk about, let's get a plan. After those plans are done, then the next step is looking for funding that would be able to pay for those practices that have been identified. In some cases, they need to have some engineering design work done. Those also will need some grant funding. And we can help steer the farmer to make that all happen with very little cost coming from out of his pocket. And then implementing that after the design is done, doing depending on whether the farmer wants to be involved totally or whether does the farmer want us to manage the bids. We can do that, but getting the right contractor. The other thing is that, the grant funding, and that's where a lot of my personal work is involved at Team Ag. There's just so many different grants coming out and changes all the time, and finding out which is the most appropriate for that farm, for that those practices, and making a package for that farm. So that's kind of our involvement, to try and see it all the way through till implementation and when it's finished.
That's great. That's helpful. Gordon, just as a last question here. So Team Ag comes in, they do, they take a look at the farm, they determine whether or not they need a plan, what practices need improvements. Can you just wrap up here this afternoon with, where does Lancaster Farmland Trust fit into that process? I think specifically how we apply for grants and how that funding gets to the farmer for the improvements.
Yeah, the Lancaster Farmland Trust also applies for various funding for farmers for implementation for this conservation projects. And that's where we, as John kind of indicated, a lot of these funding sources are a little complicated. And so one funding source might pay for the actual shovel, construction of the best management practice. One might cover engineering costs, that sort of thing. And so sometimes Lancaster Farmland Trust might have access to funds that really complement some of our partners in Team Ag's funds. So we work hand in glove, basically, with managing these fund dollars to create packages that will help the farmer cover almost all the costs. It's always great if the farmer can pay for part of it, kind of that skin in the game value there that helps them not only appreciate it more, but they have a sense of being part of it and funding it. Some farmers can't fund any of it, and so there we step in and try to fund as much of it as we have to get the job done. So our relationship with these other conservation industry partners is just imperative as far as obtaining funding. A lot of times, because of the survey work we're doing in these various townships, we have the data of the need and the interest. So as other partners get grants and they're looking for work to do, we have that database. That's one of the things that at Lancaster Farmland Trust and the involvement we have in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Improvement Program, our involvement with Lancaster Clean Water Partners, and a lot of our technical service partners, there's a lot of funding coming in from a lot of different sources. And that actual farm data we have is so valuable. John mentioned that Lancaster Clean Water Partners just received a $7.5 million grant. Well, a lot of this work we had done in a couple of these townships was, very valuable when it came to having the data already there to apply for these grants. And we didn't have to go out and scratch and dig and try and generate all this data. We have it. So it's one of the benefits of this great partnership that we have in Lancaster County to improve clean water. And it's the benefit of Lancaster Farmland Trust and our many relationships that yield a lot of benefits for landowners, not only in the conservation side, but as you said, Karen, in land preservation in general, protecting the lands of Lancaster County.
I think that's a great place to end, Gordon. The partnerships, the public-private partnerships that have been established in Lancaster County are so critical to improving the water quality, and I think that's what the goal of everybody is, and everybody has a role to play. I want to emphasize that again. It's not just the farmers, but we all have a role to play. I want to thank Gordon Hoover and John Williamson for being with us today, and for everybody who has joined the webinar. These are important and critical issues to Lancaster County, and we like to keep people informed. I hope you'll tune in to our Digging In series for the next webinar. And if there are no other questions, I think that is the end of our session today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.